Hey everyone, my name is Kyle Wehnes. I am the marketing director here at Impact Power Solutions, and I'm joined by Eric Pasi, our Chief Development Officer, to talk a little bit about the 2020 elections and their impact on solar in the Midwest and across the U.S.
Hey Kyle, what's going on, man? How are you feeling?
Doing good. How about yourself?
Oh man, I can't really complain. There's a lot of things to complain about, but solar is not one of them at this point.
Definitely. There's been a lot of interesting and exciting developments across the nation, but let's start here in the Midwest. What do you have any states in particular that you had your eye on, or that you had any interesting thoughts on after what happened in November?
Yeah, IPS. We're based in Minnesota. We do work across the country, but kind of had our eye at least at home on what was happening state level. And I think a lot of folks expected that the divided legislature that we do have, the House being Democrat and the Senate being Republican, that it was likely to flip. And some people had anticipated kind of a blue wave, given polling that was happening across the state, where that would have had major implications on clean energy policy. And so for Minnesota, a lot of forward-thinking issues like the community solar program, potentially opening up the contiguous county issue, which was done at the state legislature in Colorado, another XL state, last year. And so people kind of had their eye on a potential flip of the Senate control in Minnesota, which did not happen, did not materialize. I think the polls had Democrats leading, by anywhere from 5 to 10 points on the presidential election, which a lot of people had expected to filter down to the state level seats, which did not happen. Democrats actually lost some seats in the House, although they maintained control. And then in the Senate, the 34-33 split between Republicans and Democrats was maintained in place. And so we do expect there to be some continued push at the state level in Minnesota for reform on community solar, as well as other rooftop issues. I think the most likely bills to be passed were ones that were set aside last year, which include the solar on schools bill and solar on public buildings and critical infrastructure. We do feel like there will be some movement there. We also are, I think, optimistic about some relief packages related to civil unrest in the corridors that were affected, and including in St. Paul and then along Lake Street in Minnesota. So I think there's some room for cautious optimism. It depends on what the Senate makeup looks like for some of these committees, including the Senate Energy Committee, and we'll see how that plays out here moving into early 2021. Minnesota, though, with Walz at the helm, climate will be front and center, continue to be front and center in any kind of recovery discussions, and so we can look forward to some leadership on the executive side in Minnesota too.
In Minnesota, has renewable energy and climate policy often fallen pretty strictly along party lines, or is there interest from both sides of the aisle on getting some of this stuff passed?
Yeah, I think where we're likely to see some movement is if there are some considerations for some of the outstate communities, including mining communities. I think there's some shared ground to be had with outstate both Republicans and Democrats in some of these mining communities, where clean energy needs some of these metals, for our for our projects, for our technology, and so I think there's likely to be some crossover there, where we could get a more strengthened coalition to pass clean energy initiatives. But on a whole, it still has been relatively split. Although we have seen some more moderate Republicans coming on board to support clean energy and jobs and climate initiatives. Really within the last several years.
Awesome. So yeah, it seems like there's potential for some action, but there's still with a divided government that's going to possibly kind of limit what gets done here in the near future. Um, One thing I've seen is that Governor Pritzker in Illinois laid out his priorities for the next term, and that included a path to 100. Could you expand on that a little bit, and if that's something that's promising for the renewable industry?
Path to 100 is a follow up on the Future Energy Jobs Act, which was passed in 2016 as kind of a nuclear bailout for Exelon in the state, and allowed for funding for an adjustable block program or an incentive program that supports clean energy development, including wind and solar. And the issues I think with that program, it was the kind of first iteration, slightly over incentivized, maybe to put it lightly, and oversubscribed by a factor, a factor of 10 in the case of community solar. And so industries come back and said, we're going to lose jobs. This will stall, development and investment into the state at a critical time when we need to stem kind of the worst of the climate crisis. So Governor Pritzker's come back to support industry's proposal for a bill called Path to 100, which would refund and reinvest in the adjustable block program that's curated by the Illinois Commerce Commission. And we would expect that that has some legs moving into 2021 and a special session. Obviously, a lot is tempered based on what is happening with COVID-19. And we do expect that that obviously will take front and center stage in many states, as it should be. But in Illinois in particular, the Path to 100 bill has higher hopes, I think, of passing than it did even maybe a year ago before the virus. So expecting some good news out of Illinois here in the next call it 12 to 18 months.
So our neighbors to the east, Wisconsin, have maybe been a little bit slower to develop their solar programs and take initiatives through the legislature. Do they have any positive or negative news to come out of this election cycle, or maybe even any news recently in general?
Wisconsin, they're toast, man. They need to basically scrap everything, start all over. I'm just kidding. As much as love as I have for Wisconsin, I always like to make fun of you, Kyle, for our friendly rivalry between states here. But I think Governor Evers has a tough job on his hands. It's not easy with a Republican legislature that has for the most part been in opposition to any climate-based initiatives. And what we're seeing, at least in Wisconsin and other areas where we have more contested state level government, is that the local governments are really taking hold and taking charge. So when we're talking about Milwaukee or Madison, there are some really interesting solar and clean energy standards and initiatives that those municipalities are taking on to address things kind of at a municipal level. And I think we'll kind of see the same thing here over the next, at least the next couple of years. So not a lot of at least hope for large changes. I think we have seen a lot of announcements in the last year or so for utility scale projects that will continue to be the trend in 2021 and beyond. But for a lot of kind of what I would call smaller and distributed projects, those are going to be taking a backseat to these larger utility scale projects.
Sure, and that actually kind of leads me to another question. What your comment there with kind of local governments and city governments taking the lead. I know, for example, Columbus has a plan. Columbus, Ohio has a plan to go 100% renewable in 3 years. Do you think that cities and townships making these kinds of plans to go 100% carbon free, does that impact things, that much, or is that more of a, in name only type of decree where it's a good PR piece? What I'm trying to get at is how impactful is it when a city or state government or city government makes a push like that, independent of what's happening at the state level?
It can have a really big impact, and I think you're starting to see some places like Boulder, Colorado, although they've retreated from this just recently, but has been toying with the idea of municipalizing their utility, or pulling together a municipal utility so that they can move faster on climate and clean energy issues. Minneapolis, kind of threatened the same thing when their franchise agreement with Xcel was coming up, a couple of years ago. And so it's a tool mainly for municipalities to just say, hey, like these are things that are really important to us. And the kind of entrenched utilities need to take notice that they need to be moving faster on these issues than they have in the past. And so that may have been, one motivating factor behind Xcel's announcement early this year that they were going to get to 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. And a lot of other utilities have since followed suit, because I think there are concerns on their side that they could potentially lose market share if these municipalities decide to kind of strike it out on their own.
Sure.
For other states though, like in Minnesota with the community solar program, and we saw this kind of in the wake of President Trump pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord to really look internally and say, what can we do on our own to move the needle. And we've seen a lot of municipalities pick up the torch there and decide that they're going to invest in either behind the meter solar projects where they'll enter into agreements for power purchase agreements with developers for solar on site, or community solar, which we've helped quite a few communities, including the city of Minnetonka, city of Oakdale, city of Red Wing, and many others, the Metropolitan Council, to adopt community solar subscriptions. And so we're seeing that cities lead, especially when that it's in their best financial interest. Let alone, I think when city councils believe it's the right thing to do, they also move in that direction. So I think municipalities can make an outsized impact and really send signals to local businesses and residents that this is important to them and should be important to the greater public.
Sure. And I think that's actually a good segue kind of to, unless you had anything else important that you wanted to hit on here in the Midwest, is to zoom out a little bit to the national level. Because obviously with the new administration coming in here in January, a lot of people are interested to know, what a Biden administration's priorities will be. Obviously, they've made a very strong push to put climate near the top of their to-do list. What would that look like in those first 100 days that people like to talk about?
Yeah, in the wake of the election, a lot of people have been talking about, what does this mean for climate? What does it mean for clean energy? And there are a lot of smart people out there with, potentially better answers than I have. But I think we are likely to see again divided government at the federal level. We'll wait and see how Georgia shakes out in their two Senate elections. But assuming that Mitch McConnell controls the Senate, we're likely to see a lot of executive action. And I think in terms of climate, that will be reinstating the U.S. into the rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. It'll be adopting clean car standards that were in place from the Obama administration, but it'll also mean more favorable policy and appointments at the Federal Energy Commission, at FERC. And so that has the power to really drive a lot of development, including utility scale, mostly utility scale development across the country. And so we'll see some movement in that direction from executive actions. We'll also see as the president, or I should say the executive branch, has influence over trade policy, that some of the existing tariffs that have been implemented by President Trump are likely on the chopping block. Maybe not 100%, will be withdrawn, but at least we'll be able to see the new administration should be able to see the forest through the trees, and that if we're protecting some jobs at the cost of 10 times as many other jobs, it just doesn't make as much sense. And so I think we're also likely to see some relief on the trade side, which should suppress pricing and further accelerate the financial viability of clean energy in both existing markets as well as new and up and coming markets for solar and wind. So on the executive side, that's what I expect. I also expect that any either via COVID relief or infrastructure spending bill, some type of stimulus bill in 2021 will include some clean energy provisions that will be an important part of the negotiations. And I know that, at least from the solar industry standpoint, the investment tax credit, which drops from 26% this year to 22% next year, may have a boost. We may have some inclusion for energy storage projects and energy storage technology, and we may also see a kind of a throwback to the 1603 grant, which was in lieu of the tax credits. So we've seen financial markets, in turmoil somewhat, not have the tax appetite that they did in 2019 or 2018. What happens to tax equity in these cases? And I think a grant in lieu of the tax credit, much like we saw in the wake of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2010 and 2011, that will absolutely spur a lot of activity. The Biden administration also has talked about racial justice and justice for frontline communities as a focal point. In his administration, he kind of laid out those four issues: COVID recovery, financial recovery, climate change, and racial justice. And we do expect that a lot of, and if there are stimulus dollars that are coming into climate focused investments, that a substantial portion of those will go toward affecting these kind of frontline communities and directly involving the Black and BIPOC communities in this recovery. So the mixture of all those things is going to result in some pretty substantial movement toward clean energy in the next 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot there, right? It seems like there's going to be a lot of interesting developments coming down the pike here in the next year or two. I think a great wrap-up question, just to kind of put a bow on this, would be how are you how are you feeling? You know, after everything, you know, at the federal and the state levels here in the Midwest, how are you feeling about the industry as compared to a month or two ago? Net positive, net negative, status quo.
I mean, you have to feel good, you know, about on a whole, as a whole, right? I mean, I think moving in the direction of uh, understanding science, climate science, understanding, you know, some of these trade issues that affect us more broadly, um, and you know, for clean energy, having that be a pillar or a focal point of a um, of a presidency is something that was, you know, we didn't even see a question at the debates 4 years ago about climate, and now here it is as the you know, one of the pillars of the president-elect's you know, policies. So you have to be excited about it. You know, the work's not over. The industry and proponents, I think, have a long way to go to fight to make sure that these promises are kept, and that it's going to be, you know, continue to be a top priority. But yeah, I think there's a lot of excitement beyond just the federal level too. I think, you know, we're starting to see an ease on rhetoric from you know, certain politicians that have been in, you know, more on the anti you know, climate movement side of the equation, from, you know, denial, I think, now toward more of a, you know, an acceptance, and you know, talking more about market-driven solutions, which the, you know, clean energy industry is prepared for. So I think on all fronts, you know, there's a lot of optimism, cautious optimism. Um, you know, depending on what happens in Georgia, I think there's, you know, a lot of optimism potentially. But I think even in lieu of that, we're headed into a 2021 where investment in clean energy will continue on its kind of exponential trajectory, and we can all look forward to that.
Very exciting. Well, I just want to say thanks again for taking the time to talk about this. I know I feel a lot more well informed about the election takeaways here for our industry, and I'm sure those watching do as well. So thanks again for stopping by, and I'm sure we'll have a few more of these chats as more interesting solar news comes out here in the next weeks and months.
Absolutely. Boo Packers, go Vikes. Uh, let's keep the progress going, and yeah, thanks for hanging out, Kyle.
Of course. All right. Thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you next time.